I hope that you can come and join us each night. Once the presentations are finished, all of them will be video recorded, and we'll upload them to our website, and you'll be able to take these workbooks and scan the QR code on the back and be able to re-watch all of the presentations. Isn't that a great deal? So I hope you'll really enjoy that. My name is Myckal Morehouse. I'm the pastor here at Sandpoint Seventh-day Adventist Church, and it is my delight to be here presenting this seminar. Before we begin tonight's presentation, can we bow our heads and just invite the Lord to bless us? Let's do that together just now. Father in heaven, we want to thank you so much for the privilege that is ours to be able to talk about faith and science. I pray that you would bless us as we go through this topic together, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Tonight's topic is Beyond the Big Bang, Astonishing Evidence for a Higher Power. In this seminar, we're going to be covering some of the biggest questions that people ask about faith and science. Questions such as, does God exist? Where did life come from? Is evolution the only theory supported by the evidence? Can I have faith and also facts? Another way of saying is can I believe and still have solid reasons for my belief? Origins looks at the big life questions at the intersection of faith and reason through the lens of science. And because we're going to be using science, we need to have a definition of what science really is. So let's look at this definition together. Science is, and if you can read it with me, what does it say? The study of natural world based on facts learned through experience and observations. Science is looking at the evidence around us and testing our theories by what can be seen and known. And theories can be tested true or false by looking at things through the scientific method. We're going to have a ridiculous example. All right? We start with an assumption, and my assumption that I'm starting with is all dogs have hair. Now, I know this is perhaps a ridiculous example, but follow me. I want you to see how we can test even ridiculous assumptions that we say, of course, it's true. I don't even need to question it. All I've ever seen is hairy dogs. How many of you have a hairy dog at home? Great. All right, so our assumption is all dogs have hair. So what do we do to test our assumption? Well, we use science. We have to take time to observe not only the dogs that live around us, our furry friends that live in our own homes, but we need to observe all the different dogs around the world. So we go to our neighbor, we check out their furry friend, we go, down the street, we go up to Bonner's Ferry, maybe we go to another city, another state, another country. We're looking for other dogs around the world, and we find all sorts of different dogs. We find long-haired dogs, short-haired dogs, dogs that shed, dogs that don't shed. I should be able to prove whether my theory is correct based on taking time to look at all the evidence. That's science. And lo and behold, we found a hairless dog. The American hairless terrier. How many of you have ever had an American hairless terrier? Nobody. He'd be pretty cold in Idaho. But maybe somebody says, well, I see hair. There's hair on his nose. That's not hair, that's whiskers. That's dog whiskers. But there are also hairless cats. I found 10 different breeds of hairless cats in the world. One of them is called the Sphinx. Anyone here ever owned a hairless cat? Nope. Your cat wouldn't survive in North Idaho. Now, it's one thing to test our theory on furry dogs or hairless cats, but the real question is, can science test whether or not God exists? If we can find evidence in our universe, then yes, science can look for observable evidence in our universe to test the theory of the existence of God, and that is exactly what we will be looking at tonight. Tonight, we're going to take a journey through outer space and back in time to trace the evidence for how our universe came into existence. We will also be taking a look together at worldviews that every scientist has, whether he is a cosmologist like Professor Lawrence Krauss of Arizona State University, a biologist like Professor Richard Dawkins, or a physicist like the late Albert Einstein. Everyone, even if you aren't a scientist, has a worldview through which that you experience and interpret the world. It's like putting on a pair of glasses, and everything you see through the filter of glasses. You know, I used to go to a little science center down in Texas where they had real dinosaur footprints still preserved in the riverbed that was right there in Texas. And when they had you go there to look at the dinosaur footprints, they gave you these glasses with pink lenses. And you ask them, why are you giving us these glasses with pink lenses? They said, the world back at the time when the dinosaurs laid these footprints had a pink hue to it. You looked at the world through rose-colored glasses. And that's kind of how it is with worldviews. And everyone here has a worldview. And there are three major worldviews that are represented in our world today. And everyone here has one of these three: theism, pantheism, or atheism. Let's take a little look at each one of these worldviews. We'll start with the theistic worldview. The theistic worldview looks at the entire universe as created by a supernatural being, and let's call him God. This worldview implies that everything we see and hear and touch and taste and smell and experience had a beginning. Theists do not believe the universe is eternal. The only thing that's eternal in a theistic worldview is God. That's right. Pantheism is just a little bit different. We'll get to that in just a moment. We find the theistic worldview clearly expressed in the very first book, first chapter, and first verse of the Bible. It says, you want to read it with me? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Everything had a beginning except for God who created the universe. That's a theistic worldview. Some people would say that's a Christian worldview. The next worldview is a pantheistic worldview. This worldview also comes with the assumption that God exists, but this worldview sees God and our universe as one. God is the universe, and the universe is God. That's a pantheistic worldview. Where in the world do you have the majority of people having a more pantheistic worldview? In the Asian countries, many of the Asian countries where they have Buddhism and some of these religious ideas, they see the world as God. You can't kill the cow because the cow is God, or it's your great-grandmother. Or something else that's been reincarnated. So that's their worldview. It's an endless cycle of death and rebirth. If you ask a pantheist, did the world have a beginning? They would likely say, nope, the universe has always existed because the universe is divine. That's pantheism. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy says, historically, the majority of pantheists have regarded the universe as infinite, metaphysically perfect, necessarily existent, and eternal. They see everything around us as having always existed. And finally, we come to our third worldview, and that is an atheistic worldview. In this worldview, the supernatural does not exist. It's out of the picture. The only thing that exists in an atheistic worldview are the things that you can see, the things you can touch, the things that you can hear or taste, the things that are around you, the material stuff. That's all there is, all there ever was, and all there ever will be. And so, necessarily, an atheistic worldview sees the universe as eternal. It's always been here. So how do you test these worldviews? Theism says our universe had a beginning. Both pantheism and atheism assume that the universe has always existed. This worldview is precisely captured by renowned atheist Bertrand Russell in a 1964 debate where he said, "The universe is just there. That's all." Theism is the only worldview that does not view the universe as eternal. God created the universe, and only He is eternal. You see, if the universe is eternal, you really don't need a creator. It all hinges on whether the stuff around us has been here forever. So if you're seeking to decide for yourself whether or not God exists, the most foundational scientific question you can ask would be, is the universe eternal or not? Stephen Hawking put it this way: the universe would be completely self-contained and not affected by anything outside itself. It would neither be created nor destroyed. It would just be. What place then for a creator? So here's the question we're going to tackle tonight. Is the universe eternal, or did it have a beginning? Where does the science point? And to answer this question, we begin with one of the most famous scientists of all times. Who do you think that is? Albert Einstein. Now, why start with Albert Einstein? And there's a good reason. Before Albert Einstein, scientists really had no way of probing scientifically into the question of, does the universe have a beginning? There were guesses, but there wasn't really any way for them to go beyond guesses. Nothing that gave a real foundation for cosmology. And cosmology, that's the study of the beginning to our universe. Until Einstein developed his mathematical equations, and those are called the theory of relativity. Now, do you know what the theory of relativity is? Probably familiar to you. We call it E equals mc squared. Now, Einstein was a brilliant man with an incredibly imaginative mind. He didn't think in words, he thought in pictures. When he was just a boy, he imagined himself through mathematical equations in his mind. He imagined himself traveling right next to a light particle at the speed of light. Now, I can't wrap my mind around that, what that would have been like to travel at the speed of light right next to a light particle. Maybe someday Elon Musk will get us going at the speed of light. I don't know. But this is the way his brain thought. He could literally picture the world through mathematical equations. Now, what does his theory, the theory of relativity, really say? Let me try and explain it in as simple of terms as possible. We all know about gravity, right? Gravity pulls us down, holds us down. Or if you think of a round sphere, like a ball, gravity is what pulls us towards the center of the ball. Einstein called it the constricting force, like a python that constricts tighter and tighter. For Einstein, gravity wasn't caused by the object. The ball wasn't what pulls me to it. The earth isn't what pulls us towards it. Instead, it's the empty space that wraps around the earth that creates the pulling down force. That was Einstein's contribution to the understanding of gravity. And I'm going to explain it a little bit more. I want you all to picture in your mind a ball on the surface of a trampoline. Can you picture it? Now, if it's a heavy ball, like a really heavy ball, what's it going to do to the surface of the trampoline? It's going to bend the surface so that the further you bend it, the more the surface would curve around the edge of the ball. Now imagine this ball sitting on a trampoline. Imagine that it's heavier than all of us put together. So the trampoline's like really bowed down. If you were to take a golf ball and put the golf ball on the edge of the trampoline, where would the golf ball go? It would roll towards the ball, towards the center of the ball. Is it the ball that's pulling the golf ball towards it? No. What is it that's causing the golf ball to roll towards the volleyball? It's the curve of the surface of the trampoline that wraps around the volleyball. And that is what causes us to stay firmly put on planet Earth. By the way, just recently, they had a couple billionaires who did their first spacewalk on Elon Musk's new spaceship out there. A first. They got to experience a gravity-free walk, probably at a pretty price, but the first man to walk without, the first non-astronaut to walk without gravity, the same way we experience here on Earth. So Einstein pictured it that way. And it was known as the contracting force. Now, Einstein didn't discover gravity. It was a Christian scientist by the name of Sir Isaac Newton who, through repeated observation, correctly put together Newton's law of gravity that objects fall towards the earth. And he began to ask questions such as, why do apples fall from trees? Why do they fall towards the earth and not towards the sky? The conclusion is that there must be a force that is pulling them down, an invisible force that acts upon everything. Isaac Newton's conclusion was that the earth, like a magnet, was pulling everything toward itself, and this invisible force pulling things down must be gravity. Astronomers from ancient times have taken note of this contracting or pulling force and have found that it exists everywhere you look in the universe. Gravity can even bend light. New stars have been discovered on the other side of the sun during a solar eclipse because the light, which is on the other side of the sun, is being bent by the curvature of space around the sun, and we see it on the other side of the sun. Amazing. Only visible during a solar eclipse, almost as if the secrets of the universe were created to be discovered. Then came Galileo, a famous astronomer who probed deeper into gravity. He tested his theory believing that heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects. He took two cannonballs, one weighing much heavier than the other one, and he took them to the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Anybody been to the Leaning Tower of Pisa? Yeah, they say every year it leans a little bit more. Not a tower I would want to live in. But he dropped the two cannonballs from the Leaning Tower of Pisa together to see which one would fall faster, and he discovered that the heavy object and the light object hit the ground at the exact same time. This discovery confirmed that gravity, which is observed throughout the entire universe, is constant and consistent, meaning that whether gravity is pulling a pebble or a cannonball, it doesn't pull one more than the other. The rate at which it pulls all objects is constant and an unchanging rate. You don't have apples falling faster or slower than pears or coconuts. No matter the object's size or weight or shape, the gravitational pull was constant, predictable, stable, and unchanging. Little did these early scientists realize that they were discovering a force that would lead the earnest seeker back to the creator of the universe and prove the ancient truth that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Einstein refined the theory of gravity further by revealing that instead of the earth pulling everything in, it was space wrapped around earth that pulled things in, and this was a constant force present all over the universe. However, there was one major problem. If we lived in a universe where the only force that existed was a force that pulled everything together, how big would our universe be? Yeah, even smaller than that. Even smaller. The answer is that if the only force we had in our universe was gravity, there wouldn't be a universe. Not at all. No stars, no planets, no solar systems, no galaxy. Everything would be smashed together like a big pancake. Our universe would look like one tiny, tight little ball of matter and energy. And since we live in a universe that isn't smushed together, the logical conclusion is that gravity must be competing with another force that pushes everything apart. This force had to be slightly stronger than gravity to keep our universe in the stable state we see it today. A universe with a contracting force, gravity, and an even more powerful expanding force. But this idea, although logical, presents a new problem because it suggests that our universe is expanding. It's growing. It's moving outward. And this produced a major problem from Einstein, and we call it Einstein's dilemma. You see, before 1917, this brilliant mind believed that the universe was static and eternal, meaning that everything that has been hanging in space today as it has always been. The planets have always followed the same path through space. The stars have always been shining in their set place. Everything has just been hanging in this perfect balance from eternity past and will forevermore. The universe, he believed, was eternal. Now, just a question. Let's go back to our worldviews. Can you guess which worldview Einstein had? There's only two options, really, right? Either pantheism or atheism, because those are the only two worldviews that see this universe as eternal. And that's how Einstein viewed this universe. The problem he kept encountering was that the evidence in his field equations pointed to a universe that was not just sitting there, but a universe that was expanding. And if the universe is expanding, it implies that the universe is not eternal, but had a beginning. Everything we see had to have started at some time in the distant past. Let me illustrate this for you. If a universe is expanding, then it is moving outward, or growing bigger as time goes by, right? Are you following? Every year, the universe is getting bigger than the year before. Do you have your balloon? Now's the time for you to pull out your balloon. Now, I hope you have plenty of air in your lungs. Maybe you had a long day. You want to get some air out of your chest. Go ahead and blow into your balloon. Bigger. Don't pass out on me. Every breath, your balloon gets bigger and bigger. And your breaths represent time. As time goes by, it's like the universe is expanding, going bigger and bigger. So each year, you're bigger than the year before. And the year before. We knew it was going to happen. Okay. Now, what if you go back in time? That's what happens with our universe if you go back in time. And if you go far enough back in time, squish all the air out, you get what scientists call an infinitesimal point, a point where you can't get any smaller. All the air has been pushed out. It's the smallest point that you could possibly get, and they say that is where everything had a beginning. Do you see how an expanding universe presents a real problem for those who believe that our universe is eternal? Because with an expanding universe, you logically go back in time, and as you go back in time, you have to come to a place where you can't go back any further, and there has to be a beginning. If the universe is expanding today, there must have been a point, sometime in the distant past, when the expansion started. What would Einstein do with this dilemma? On the one hand, he believed that the universe was eternal, had always been there just hanging in space. On the other hand, the evidence of his theories pointed to a beginning to the universe. Einstein had a choice. He could follow the evidence, or he could hold on to his worldview and reinterpret the evidence. What do you think Einstein chose to do? Only had two choices. Einstein decided that he was going to hold on to his worldview and change his equations to fit his worldview. And he added something into his equations called the cosmological constant, which kind of was like a balancing mathematical equation that allowed the expanding force and the contracting force to kind of balance out so that everything just stayed steady. The stars could still shine right where they had for eternity past. The planets could still go around the stars as they always had done. Everything could be the steady state as he had always pictured it. And there was a sigh of relief for Einstein. His mathematical equations could fit with this cosmological constant. Scientists are faced with the same dilemma that Einstein was faced with today. They're confronted with questions like, what should I do when my science collides with my worldview? I want you to consider a historical example of this together. Consider the spider. Aristotle classified the spider as an insect. And an insect has how many legs? 6 legs. And because Aristotle was the one that classified spiders as insects, nobody questioned the great Aristotle because, after all, it's the great Aristotle. Who's going to question Aristotle? If Aristotle says it's an insect, it must be an insect. And so even though some people thought they saw 8 legs, they kind of, rubbed their eyes and said, I must be seeing things, and they just assumed that Aristotle was right. That is, until Jean-Baptiste Lamarck pinned a spider and counted the legs. 8 legs. He counted them again. 8 legs. And people began to wake up. By nature, human beings, whether a scientist or a grocery store clerk, don't like to upset the apple cart of our own personal beliefs. But popularity doesn't make something true. Just because the majority have accepted it, or a great respected scientist said it, just because a man with a degree decrees it, doesn't mean we can't question it. Truth can afford examination. Do you believe that? And so examine everything. In 1922, the same year Stalin took over power in Russia, Alexander Friedman published a set of remarkable solutions to Einstein's equations. Friedman introduced the expression expanding universe, and one of his solutions modeled a universe that began with a small point. It even had an expansion rate which increased over time, just as scientific observations indicate. Then, in an obscure 1927 paper written in French, Georges Lemaitre independently published his solution to Einstein's equations. In 1931, he said the universe had to have a beginning. Einstein heard about it, still wasn't convinced. Lemaitre reasoned that on its long journey to Earth, a galaxy's light is stretched in frequency by the expansion of space itself. The longer the light journeys, the more the universe has expanded, thus the greater the light stretching. Have you ever heard an ambulance go by you? When it goes by, have you ever noticed how the pitch of the ambulance changes? Woo, woo, woo. Listen. Did you notice the lowering of the pitch? What's happening there? It's called the Doppler effect. The Doppler effect says that sound, as it's coming towards you, the sound waves are short and compressed together. But as the object that's making the sound is moving away from you, the sound waves begin to stretch out and become longer. And we hear that with our ears as a lower frequency. It happens with sound, but it also happens with light. When something that's emitting light is moving away from us at a set pace, the light frequency is stretched and it moves into the red spectrum. It's called the red shift. And this is one of the ways that scientists can tell that a star is moving away from them in space, because the light actually shifts into the red spectrum. Lemaitre saw this, or said that there was this red shift, and Lemaitre backed up his claim by correlating published redshift data from scientists in Stromberg and Slipher with galaxy-distant measurements by Hubble. It wasn't until Edwin Hubble confirmed the visible proof through a telescope that Einstein finally changed his mind. Edwin Hubble was doing research on Mount Wilson's observatory and was measuring the distance of galaxies from Earth. And while he was doing these measurements, he saw that in every direction he turned his telescope, galaxies were all moving outward. And the further a galaxy was away from our own, the faster it was moving outward. So in 1929, Hubble formulated the empirical redshift distant law of the galaxies, today simply known as Hubble's law. This was observable evidence matching Einstein's theory of relativity that we indeed live in an expanding universe. It was after this that Einstein admitted that this was the biggest blunder of his life. In 1922, Alexander Friedman's work showed an expanding universe was shown to Einstein, and he ignored it. In 1927, Georges Lemaitre shared his theory with Einstein that the universe is expanding, but he dismissed it. And finally, after 1931, Hubble shows Einstein the redshift himself through Hubble's telescope nearly 10 years later, and Einstein finally gave in to the evidence. The universe was indeed expanding, and at some point in the distant past, the universe had a beginning. Now, why the hesitancy among scientists to accept a universe that is not eternal? Because a universe that has a beginning logically must also have a what? A beginner. If the universe had a time when it came into existence, then we would naturally conclude that someone or something that existed before the universe must be responsible for that universe. But what about the Big Bang Theory? Does this theory do away with the need for a creator? Lawrence Krauss, a cosmologist at Arizona State University, says, all evidence supports the Big Bang. Stephen Hawking, a theoretical physicist, now gone, said almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, before we accept the Big Bang, let's take a closer look at the theory and the evidence for it. First of all, scientists assume that if you go back in time, you eventually arrive at a place where all matter is condensed. Remember our balloon? All matter is condensed into one very tight little ball. Got to get all the air out first, which scientists call a singularity. Alexander Friedman had said it was an infinitesimally small point. Well, how big is an infinitesimally small point? What do you think? The size of a basketball? The size of an acorn? The size of a human cell? What about the size of an atom? What about the size of a proton? Researchers have concluded, in their own professional opinion, that the entire universe was condensed down to the size of several billionths the diameter of a proton. When's the last time you've seen a proton? That's pretty small. We can't even detect the edges of this universe, let alone describe how it could squeeze into something almost infinitely small. And now imagine all the energy of every one of the billions and billions of stars shoved into that tiny speck that will become our universe. Are you having trouble imagining it? When we talk about the Big Bang, we're talking about something that is beyond the natural world. No one has ever witnessed anything in our universe that even remotely suggests that this is possible. Do you know what you call something that is not naturally possible? Supernatural. Supernatural comes from two Latin words, supra, which means above, natural, above nature. Supernatural. Do you see that there are two competing supernatural theories that exist today to describe how our universe began? And most people on the planet accept one of these two theories, and there's only two major theories. Likely everyone in this room accepts one or the other of these theories, but I want you to see that both the Big Bang and creation require a supernatural explanation. Either you believe that the entire universe squeezed down to billions of times smaller than a proton, and through an unexplained miracle began to expand with all the precise and delicate balance of forces that exist in our universe and play from the very beginning, or you believe that there is a supernatural eternal entity that created matter and energy and set it in motion. You got two options, but both options are supernatural. Stephen Hawking presented further evidence based on the curvature of space that if you go back in time, the small little point that is supposed to contain the universe compresses in the curvature of space infinitely tight. He actually says that when you go back in space, you know how a black hole has so much gravitational pull that it sucks in other stars around it? If you were to take the entire universe, he said that the gravitational pull at that point would coil space around in on itself, and that coil would continue to coil tighter and tighter and tighter until whatever matter and whatever energy was left in that coil would disappear. His words, you would get to a 0 point where spatial volume and mass equal 0. Let me put that into plain English. Eventually, you go back far enough in time, you come to a place where there's nothing. And that point, like that second between nothing and something, is unexplained by science. How do you get something from nothing? Not an issue if you believe in a theistic worldview. In other words, if you keep going back in time, the universe, according to the most brilliant minds, must have not existed, and then suddenly had a moment when it did exist. Stephen Hawking is not the only one to theorize this. Alan Guth, a theoretical physicist, said this: the observable universe could have evolved from an infinitesimal region. Remember, that's billionths the size of a proton. It's then tempting to go one step further and speculate that the entire universe evolved literally from what? Nothing. At this singularity, space and time came into existence. Literally nothing existed before the singularity. So if the universe originated at such a singularity, we would truly have a creation ex nihilo, or that means out of nothing. Now wait a minute. What current respectable physicists and cosmologists are saying is that our universe came from what? It came from nothing. I think it is way more intellectually satisfying and far more logical to believe that the universe came from an eternal being, God, than to speculate that the universe came from nothing. Now, what is the difference between the Big Bang creating the entire universe out of nothing versus God creating the universe from nothing? It is that God is a person while the Big Bang is only an event. Both are supernatural. Both explain how something came from nothing. But if the universe is not eternal, only a supernatural cause could explain how the universe got here. You only have two choices, two supernatural choices: God or a universe from nothing. The most plausible, logical, reasonable choice is God. And here's why it's a logical choice. We all can see that everything in our universe came from something, right? Something that preceded before it. The trees and bushes and the front lawn came from seeds that existed before them. And those seeds came from trees and bushes that existed before them. Every living creature has a parent creature that existed before it and is responsible for its own existence. You have a living illustration of how the universe arose in your own family life. How many here know that you came from a biological mother and a biological father? That's all of us. Can't deny it. We all came from a biological mother or a biological father. That's everyone. It's self-evident, right? Did your mother and father exist before you existed? Yes, of course they did. Are they responsible for your existence? Of course they are. My life came from their life. My body from their body. The energy I have came from their paternal energy. You could say that matter and energy that makes up me came from the matter and energy of my parents who existed before me. That is precisely the living principle in our universe that reveals that our universe was created by God who existed before the universe. It is true that something is eternal, but that something is not the universe. That something is God. Now, we don't have a single example in all the vast records of history or science for something coming from nothing. Not a flea, not a tick, not a pebble, not a grain of sand, not a single star or galaxy or planet, not a single atom spontaneously arose from nothing. That's not science. We call that science fiction. But if God created the universe, then the universe came from something. We say God created it from nothing because He didn't use pre-existing material. But when God created, it was His energy that fired up the first star. It was His power that brought matter into existence. It was His infinite wisdom that set the perfect and balanced laws like gravity that govern our entire physical cosmos. The universe did come from something. It came from God. Now, which theory is the most closely supported by what we repeatedly observe in our world? A universe from nothing or a universe from an eternal being? Now listen to how Stephen Hawking tries to solve this problem, alleging that God did not create the universe, but that gravity did. In his famous speech, Origin of the Universe, Hawking asks this question: so where did the energy come from to create the matter? The answer is that it was borrowed from the gravitational energy of the universe. Now, if you have a clear brain this evening, any observer should be asking, what universe are you talking about? Right? What universe is the universe borrowing from? If you are creating the universe and you have to borrow energy from the universe in order for the universe to exist, your theory is about as absurd and circular as me saying the reason I exist is because I borrowed energy from myself to create myself. Do you see? And there's more than just logic and reason to prove that the Big Bang Theory is an obsolete theory. There are 7 major problems with the Big Bang that disprove it as a valid option for explaining how our universe came into being. The first major problem is that we find uniform temperature in space. Now, how many of you heat with a wood-burning stove? Okay, great. When you fire that up, do you have a uniform 68 degrees throughout your house? You say, I wish. I wish. Instead, you fire that thing up, and you're either too hot or you're too cold, depending on where you go in your house, right? You're either baking hot or you're freezing cold. When scientists look out over our universe, they find that there's uniform temperature throughout our universe. And that uniform temperature would have required longer than 13.8 billion years, which scientists say is the length of time since the Big Bang. They say between 13 and 14 billion years. That's a lot of time. However, it isn't enough time to take all the energy in the universe, have it explode and expand, and then have it evenly spread throughout the entire universe so that you have an even, constant temperature everywhere you look. All scientific measurements of the temperature in the universe, no matter which direction scientists point, measures at an even 200 microkelvin. That's it. There just isn't enough time for energy to disperse evenly through the entire universe, even if you had 13 to 14 billion years. It's called the horizon problem. The second problem for the Big Bang is the non-uniform distribution of matter at the level of galaxies and solar systems. And by the way, uniform temperature, not a problem if God created. He creates a galaxy here, boom, a planet here, boom, a star here, boom, and there's temperature even all over the universe. The only problem this really affects is if you believe that all energy and mass were condensed in one tight ball and then exploded, then you have something like a wood stove exploding, right? Then you'd have it super hot when you're 2 feet from the stove and super cool far away, but it takes a long time for the heat to even out. So the second problem is a distribution of matter is not uniform. When we look at the distribution of matter at the size of galaxies and at the size of solar systems, we find that matter isn't evenly distributed. You know, if I were to take a whole thing of marbles, and I were to drop the marbles straight on the ground, like a whole handful of marbles, you'd expect them to go in an even distribution in all directions, right? Same thing with the Big Bang. They expect that if the Big Bang explodes, it's going to distribute the matter evenly throughout the universe. But that's not what we find. When we look in our telescopes throughout the universe, we find everything clumped together in different little clumps. So you have a clump called the Milky Way galaxy, and it's just all this matter that's kind of clumped together, and then there's tons of space between that and the next galaxy, or the next solar system, or the next cluster. And a cluster is a whole bunch of galaxies. Our Virgo cluster has 2,000 galaxies. And each galaxy has a ton of different solar systems. A solar system is just planets that rotate around a single star, right? We're going to explain that a little bit more in just a moment. But it's not a problem if our Creator, who placed these spinning galaxies where He wanted, has them all clumped together wherever He wants. It's not a problem with a creation scenario. It is a problem with a Big Bang scenario. Another major problem is that not everything in the universe spins in the same direction. Now, if everything exploded from a single object just sitting in space, all objects would have been projected outward in straight lines. Making sense? But when we look in our universe, do we see everything moving in straight lines? No, what do we see? We see everything spinning. It's called angular motion. Planets go around stars, galaxies spin, moons spin. Everything is spinning and going in circles in the universe. Now, I want you to imagine in your mind a bunch of children on a merry-go-round. How many of you ever did that little trick where you spin it as fast as you can and hold on for dear life? Did anyone do that? Yeah. I'm sure that there's laws against that today somewhere. Maybe not in Idaho. But just imagine 5 kids all on the edge of a merry-go-round, and you spin it faster and faster and faster until their legs levitate. And they're holding on for dear life, screaming, "Stop spinning it!" And you spin it faster, and eventually they all let go at the same time. What happens to the kids? Hopefully they were wearing helmets, right? But they all are spinning as they come off the merry-go-round. And you know what direction they're spinning? They're all spinning the same direction the merry-go-round was spinning. All of them. Okay, take that illustration and think of the entire universe in one tiny little ball that's spinning, and then suddenly that spinning ball explodes. What should we find in our universe? Everything's going to spin, but it's all going to spin the same direction. That's right. Here's the problem. When we look in our universe through our telescopes, when we study spinning objects of outer space, we discover some galaxies are spinning backwards. Some planets are spinning backwards, and some moons are spinning backwards. This is called retrograde motion. Planets that spin backwards are Venus, Uranus, and Pluto. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune all have moons orbiting in both directions. Galaxy NGC 4622. Don't ask me why they named them this way. That's just their name. It's rotating backwards. A fourth problem for the Big Bang is mature galaxy formation during the supposed first billion years of the universe. The Big Bang theory predicts that galaxies on the edge of our universe are around 13 billion years old. Now, the reason it's a problem to look through your telescope at the edge of the universe and see galaxies that are as mature as ours is theoretically that light has been traveling for 13 billion years, so that when you finally see it here on Earth, you're looking back at the very moment that evolution created the very first galaxy on the very edge of the universe. The problem is that those galaxies are not young little blobs. Those galaxies are as mature and fully grown and filled with stars as our own Milky Way galaxy. And it's not just galaxies, it's entire clusters. In the Astrophysical Journal Letters, it says there's not just one, but there are at least 15 mature galaxies that have been found at a record-breaking average distance of 12 billion light years away. Their existence at such an early time raises new questions about what forced them to grow up so quickly. It's not quite time for theorists to panic, but we're getting there, said astronomer Roberto Abraham. In 2015, Caltech astronomers published a discovery of the oldest detected galaxy, EGS 8P7. It's more than 13.2 billion years old, which is far, far too old for a mature galaxy to have formed in the Big Bang. But it's not a problem for creation. Not a problem for a God who created the galaxies at His pleasure. Here's another one discovered in 2016, galaxy GNZ11, a remarkable luminous galaxy at Z11.1, just 400 million years after the supposed Big Bang. Again, not a problem at all for a worldview with God as a creator. Then you have the fifth major problem, and that's mature clusters. Here's CLJ1449 plus 0856. I don't know if there's a better way to pronounce that. But they found evidence suggesting that most of the galaxies in the cluster were not forming stars, but were composed of stars that were already 1 billion years old. That makes the cluster a mature object, similar in mass to the Virgo cluster. Now remember, I told you that the Virgo cluster has 2,000 galaxies, and our own Milky Way galaxy is part of that cluster. It's huge. Now remember, you have solar systems. That's planets circling a single star. Usually a solar system is a few light years large. That's equal to about 12 trillion miles wide. That's a solar system. Many solar systems make up a single galaxy. Galaxies are hundreds of thousands of light years wide. A single galaxy cluster can contain thousands of galaxies. Is that blowing your mind? It's huge. And so for them to find mature clusters on the very edge of space completely blows to pieces the idea of this Big Bang that happened and then stars and galaxies forming over millions and billions of years. Instead, it fits the idea of an infinite God who said, I'm going to make something incredibly intricate, like incredibly intricate, and not even as big as I am, but something bigger than any human could think right over here, and I'm going to make the exact same thing way over here on this side of the universe as well. It's amazing. Number 6 on the list of problems astronomers have discovered is that surface brightness of distant galaxies are the same as close galaxies. In contrast, the Big Bang Theory tells us that in an expanding universe, objects actually should appear fainter but bigger. Thus, in this theory, the surface brightness decreases with the distance. In addition, the light is stretched as the universe expanded, further dimming the light. The problem is that when they looked at the surface brightness of faraway galaxies, they found the surface brightness was exactly the same as galaxies that are close by. And the seventh biggest blow to the Big Bang Theory is a star known as the Methuselah star. Now, remember, scientists have not discovered even a fraction of the stars, galaxies, or solar systems in our universe. Every single day, an astronomer could find a star no one has ever cataloged before. There are billions and billions of them. For a comparison, if you took a cup of sand from the beach, and found in that tiny cup a single grain of sand that was incredibly old, how likely is it that in the rest of the beach around the world, you could possibly find a grain of sand even older? Pretty likely, right? The odds are high because the sample is so incredibly small. This is the framework you need to have in your mind when you consider the Methuselah star. NASA has calculated the age of the oldest known star, nicknamed the Methuselah star. It's cataloged in astronomy as star HD 140283. It's about 190 light years away. It's moving at an amazing speed of 800,000 miles per hour. The first calculation of the star put it at a whopping age of 16 billion years old. However, that presented an obvious problem with a universe that is supposedly only 13.8 billion years old. So they recalculated, and after getting the lowest number they could possibly get, taking into account some things like oxygen content and other items that could make the star appear older, they got down to 14.5 billion years old. Still another 1 billion years older than the universe itself exists, they say existed. How can you have a star older than the universe? It's not a problem, and even expected to find ancient stars created by an eternal God. There would be no problem for creation for scientists to find a star next year that is very ancient. They may exist, and we haven't found them. Sure enough, as technology increases, scientists are finding older and older stars and galaxies, proving once again that the theories around the Big Bang and the age of the universe don't fit. The James Webb Telescope, one of the newest technologies being used today, has probed even deeper into the far reaches of space. In February 2023, just last year, Space.com published this article which said, within days of the telescope coming online in late June 2022, researchers began discovering thousands of new galaxies more distant and ancient than any previously documented. Some perhaps more than 150 million years older than the oldest identified by Hubble. The Bible declares in Psalms 33, verse 6, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all the hosts of them by the breath of his mouth. Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It wasn't a big bang. It was God who existed before the stars, who is older than the universe. He is the one who created all these things, just as the Bible describes. The inconsistencies of the Big Bang have led a group of scientists, just over 30, to write an open letter to the scientific community explaining the problem with the Big Bang. Here is that letter. It says, in cosmology today, doubt and dissent are not tolerated, and young scientists learn to remain silent if they have anything negative to say about the standard Big Bang model. Those who doubt the Big Bang fear that saying so will cost them their funding. Even observations are now interpreted through the biased filter, judged right or wrong, depending on whether or not they support the Big Bang. So discordant data on red shifts, lithium and helium abundance, and galaxy distribution, among other topics, are ignored or ridiculed. This reflects a growing dogmatic mindset that is alien to the spirit of free scientific inquiry. Now, why would the scientific community be so dogmatic? Why not follow the growing evidence? Robert Dickey of Princeton University said this, an infinitely old universe would what? Relieve us of the necessity of understanding the origin of matter at any finite time in the past. If we have a super old universe, we don't even have to talk about how it began. And thus, we can avoid the question of does God exist at all? However, there is even more powerful evidence indicating our universe had a beginning, and it had to have come from a supernatural source outside of the universe. How many of you have heard of the second law of thermodynamics? Second law of thermodynamics. This law indicates that our universe cannot be eternal and must have a beginning. It states that in a closed system, such as our universe, usable energy is slowly converted to unusable energy. Think of a cup of boiling water. If I were to set a cup of boiling water on the table, should I stick my finger in it? No. But let's say I wait for an hour and then come back. Can I stick my finger in it? What's happened to all the energy in the cup? It's dissipated into the room. Now, can I say I want all that energy back and put all that energy back in the cup? It's never going back, is it? That's the second law of thermodynamics. It says the energy in the cup moves out of the cup and it never comes back. It only goes one direction. Usable energy creates non-usable energy, and it never comes back. If we lived in an infinitely old universe, would we have any usable energy in our universe left? According to the second law of thermodynamics, all energy would have been used up. That's another point that helps us to know that our universe had a beginning, that it was created. There's something else that the second law of thermodynamics says. It says that everything in our universe is going from order to chaos. We also witness this every day. Anyone here that is wearing the same clothes they wore 40 years ago? Don't answer that question. Why do we buy new clothes? New homes, new cars, new tires. Why do we have to repair roads or fix up abandoned shacks? Anyone here seen before and after pictures of Cuba? I went to Cuba for a month. Was there preaching, working, and they're still driving cars. Everyone who is wealthy or well-to-do enough to drive a car is driving a car from the 1950s. Tomorrow morning, I'll tell you a story of an angel that came by and saved me when my 1950s car broke down in Cuba. True story. I'll share it tomorrow morning at 11. Right here at the church. We have a church service. But 1950s cars, 1950s buildings. I mean, you look at the postcards from Cuba in the 1950s. These buildings look pristine. And now they're completely dilapidated, completely falling apart. Why is that? Why didn't they just stay pristine looking as they did 50 years ago, 70 years ago? Second law of thermodynamics. Everything moves from order to chaos. If we had an eternal universe, would we see any order left in our universe? No. According to the second law of thermodynamics, everything would have fallen apart by now. So we know that the universe is not eternal. It had a beginning. If the Big Bang cosmological scenario is abandoned, and the question of what will replace it is a major issue because a more viable, non-theistic contender does not now exist. All of the competing theories suffer from as many, if not more, problems than the Big Bang. I think, however, that we must go further than this and admit that the only accepted explanation is creation. I know that this is anathema to physicists, as it is to me, wrote H.J. Lipson, but we must not reject a theory that we do not like if the experimental evidence supports it. Right? Okay, you can take a deep breath. That was a lot of information. By the way, tonight's topic was the most technical of all the topics that I have covered. It is the most thorough, most scientific. It gets a little bit easier to digest as we go to tomorrow afternoon at 3 and the next afternoon at 3. But let me do a quick review. Here's the evidence. We know an expanding universe indicates a beginning. We know that because of the red shift of galaxies. Remember the Doppler effect? Woo, 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 woo. It's the stretch of light. We also, the general theory of relativity showed that our universe had a beginning. The second law of thermodynamics indicates that the universe had a beginning. A usable energy still exists, and the universe still has order. We also looked at 7 different problems with the Big Bang theory. The uniform temperature of space, the non-uniform distribution of matter, the universe that spins both ways, mature galaxies on the edge of the universe, mature clusters on the edge of the universe, surface brightness for distant galaxies matches the surface brightness of nearby galaxies, and lastly, the Methuselah star. George Greenstein, an astronomer, said the thought insistently arises that some supernatural agency, or rather agency, capital A, must be involved. Is it possible that suddenly, without intending to, we have stumbled upon the scientific proof of existence of a supreme being? This was how early scientists of ancient times thought about it. Nicholas Copernicus said, "The mechanism of the universe, wrought for us by a supremely good and orderly creator, the system, the best and the most orderly artist of all, framed for our sake." Scientists down through time have looked up into the stars. Many have gazed at these celestial bodies with questions running through their minds, and more than one has concluded that our universe declares the existence of God. And that's in a direct alignment with what the Bible says in a theistic worldview. The heavens, can you read it with me? The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Romans 1 verse 20, let's read this one together. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. And then Psalms 53 verse 1, it tells us that we really would be foolish to deny the evidence that God has given us in this world. It tells us that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. This evidence has led many to a belief in God. Nicholas Copernicus, Pascal, Halley, Kepler, Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, Galileo, Alan Sandage, Sir Fred Hoyle, Arno Penzias, Charles Townes, Guillermo Gonzalez, and Antony Flew are all examples of scientists today and in the past who have come to believe that science proves the existence of God. Antony Flew was a devout atheist. He debated pastors, Christian apologists, and religious personalities in front of large audiences about the existence of God. He felt that he had solid reasons for why he did not believe God existed and why he had chosen atheism. Antony Flew always said, I will go wherever the evidence leads. If the evidence leads to God, why shouldn't I follow it? But if it leads away from God, then that's where I'm going. For years, this man stood against this notion that God exists until recent discoveries in science began to plague the mind of the aging atheist. The evidence was beginning to show that nothing short of supernatural could have brought about our current universe. The same battle, no doubt, raged inside Flew's mind as it had inside of Einstein's mind. Will I follow the evidence or hold on to my philosophy? And let me tell you, Flew had a lot to lose. His credibility, his years of debating Christians, his scientific career. I mean, he had a legacy now of being the most notorious atheist in the world. But he always said, I need to go where the evidence leads. And so Antony Flew shocked the world in 2004 when he came out with a book that he wrote, There Is a God, How the Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. And friends, I hope that we can be as honest and say, I'm going to go where the evidence leads. And if the evidence has led the most notorious atheist to be willing to change his point of view, maybe you and I can stand a little bit firmer and a little taller on the notion that God created the heavens and the earth. Tonight, the God of heaven speaks to your heart and mind through his creation, declaring that he does exist. Follow this reasoning with me for a brief moment before we close. If our universe had to have been created through something supernatural, and that is a personal, eternal being, God, then the next question we naturally arrive at is, why? To create something indicates that you have a purpose for it, a will for it, a reason for it. And that is exactly what the implications of tonight are for your life, friend. You're not an accident in the great cosmos. Being the product of creation means there is intentionality, purpose, and meaning for your life. And that purpose, that meaning can be found only if you choose to seek the one who made you. Do you see it? I really hope you're gaining a new appreciation and a new glimpse of God tonight. As we continue through this series, we're just going to build faith with science. We're going to build a relationship with an eternal God through evidence from science. I'm excited. How about you? Would you join me in bowing your heads as we pray tonight? Heavenly Father, we want to thank you for leading and guiding our discussion together tonight as we discovered evidence in outer space, in the universe, for your existence, that you do exist. And I pray, Lord, that you would bless us not just to know that you exist, but to go a step further and realize that we have purpose and meaning because we are not an accident in this universe. We were created by a God who was intentional about making sure there was a planet called Earth and a person called you and me right here on this planet at this time. May we pray and reach out to you from this day forward, calling on your name. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Tomorrow's presentation is at 3 p.m. What time? 3 p.m. If you want to hear my angel story, you come tomorrow morning at 11. Okay? Unravel the secret code written in the human cell. You're not going to want to miss tomorrow's presentation, the God code. And then immediately after the God code at 4 p.m., we'll have another presentation where we're going to take a journey through the animal kingdom. The kids will love it. We're going to look at creatures as small as fruit flies all the way up to giraffes. And we're going to see how these creatures defy the theory of chance. Just like tonight, you'll have a beautifully designed workbook awaiting for you for free. And we also have a clear box outside with $100 in it. I like to call it the Enigma. And if you're registered, then you get a ticket to try and guess the code. Guess the code, you get the $100. And that's supposed to illustrate something I'm going to talk about tomorrow night. So we'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Thanks for coming, everyone. It's been a pleasure to have you at Origins, the Evidence.